Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
In a field not far from the house, a modestly mannered lady walks her little dog. The most ordinary woman, a medic by education, a pensioner, and, in general, unremarkable, unusual. All she had was a name. Her name was Betty. She had been retired for a long time, having worked as a physician midwife for over 30 years. Apart from Steve, the little Pekingese, this woman had no one in the world. Her beloved husband and almost all of her few relatives have long been in the city cemetery, and she and her spouse never had children. But the woman was not discouraged. She was friends with several neighbors in the entranceway and often walked with her four-legged pet. On these walks, she could socialize with other dog owners and not feel so lonely. Betty was respected by her neighbors and more than once was offered to become a house superintendent for her initiative and common sense. But she, in her modesty, always refused every day. In the mornings and evenings, this lovely woman could be found on a walk with her dog. And in the daylight hours from spring to fall, she was often seen on the large open balcony. There she was always busy doing business, watering and replanting flowers. She was reading books or knitting. Sometimes in the small apartment of glory arranged sit-downs with friends. And then they laughed, recalling interesting stories from their lives, tales from working days, and wash over the bones, common acquaintances and close relatives. For example, the woman knew that the son-in-law of one of her friends had been caught cheating, and her daughter was still thinking about whether to forgive the cheater or not. Thanks to such gatherings, Betty did not feel abandoned and neglected. Often looking at herself in the mirror, she looked at her face with interest in the reflection of a nice-looking woman who did not look 60 years old, at most 50. She was still quite slender and good-looking. Her brown and slightly gray hair framed her oval face and flowed in light waves down her back to just below her shoulders. Light skin is beautiful. Canceled by the warm shade of her hair, there were hardly any deep wrinkles on her face. On her face immediately stood out dark, beautifully drawn eyebrows behind delicately pink lips, hid smooth, natural white shade natural teeth. "It's nothing old grandmothers won't soon call," she often said, addressing herself and Steve. "To make some money, you can't do much on your pension." Betty began to knit different things to order. She was very happy to buy soft toys, asked to knit characters, cartoons, movies, and even portraits. Clothes were in less demand, but also sold quite successfully. The woman liked very much that she was able to turn her hobby into an additional income. And while working, she also watched a lot of interesting movies and TV series. Her favorite were stories about doctors, and recently she discovered A Good Doctor, which she enjoyed watching, remembering her everyday life as a doctor. Every evening she would stroke her little dog for a long time and brush its silky and clean hair. And before going to bed, she always talked to her, telling her how the day had gone or what interesting things had happened in her life. Sometimes taking out the only jewel from her beautiful jewelry box, inherited from her mother or even from her grandmother, she would reminisce about her childhood and dream about how she would save money and go to Poland, to her historical homeland. "Steve," said the woman, addressing her Pekingese, "imagine this jewelry once belonged to Polish King Stanislaw August in 1784. Then it was handed down from generation to generation to the eldest daughters in the family. And since the end of the 18th century, this magnificent pendant in an unpretentious gold frame, with a natural transparent sapphire in 10 carats, has changed owners more than 12 times. And now it's mine. And I'm over 60 years old. I have no children, no grandchildren. What am I going to do with it? I don't know. I'll go to my small homeland, Poland. I'll see if I can figure it out there. Will you come with me? Of course you will. We'll look after you here. You're the only one left in this world. There's no one closer to me." Living very modestly and frugally and saving money from orders, for 2 years Betty accumulated the necessary amount to buy a cherished tour to Poland. Going to the travel agency with a ready-made itinerary, Betty expected that she would be persuaded to buy the vouchers that needed to be sold, and no one would adjust to her. But the perky young girl was very responsive and pleasant, immediately praised the choice of cities for excursions, and helped to decide on hotels and transportation. She also prepared the documents and sent them to the visa center. A few weeks later, having received the visa, the woman once again came to the travel agency to sign the contract and also received the necessary documents, insurance, and instructions for the trip. And holding finally in her hands the tickets and itinerary for a 2-week overseas tour, Betty felt happier than she ever had before. On her way home, she went shopping, buying almost all the items she needed for the trip. The woman decided to walk to her house through the park. Walking leisurely through the alley, Betty enjoyed the peace and quiet, admiring the trees, the pond with the island in the center. Already approaching the house, she saw her friend. They were next-door neighbors. Molly was already 73 years old, but she did not look her age. She leads a healthy, active lifestyle and looks after her grandchildren on weekends. The woman always felt and behaved younger. She tried to accustom her friends to her regimen. The neighbor's face was simple, open from under the dark, sharp, long eyebrows, looked blue already eyes. Their expression often changed. It depended on the mood of her friend, but most often they were sly, attentive, and serious. Molly, after the death of her husband this year, had become very close to the dowager for several years. Betty was now out of the distance, seeing her friend. She quickened her step and spoke first, before she could even approach Betty's interlocutor. Her neighbor exclaimed, "My dear, hello. How are you doing? Because we have not seen today in the field and my daughter to walk. I haven't seen you. Did you have something to do?" "Oh, hello, Molly." Betty said hello back. "I was at the travel agency. I'm going to Poland for 2 weeks. I'm going to visit different cities, get to know my native culture, maybe learn something about my family. My father didn't tell me much. What if I find relatives? Are you crazy?" My friend splashed her hands. "At your age to fly to unknown places? What for? What if something happens to you? Who will pick you up? Go? Leave it. Where will yours go? Will she wait for you in an empty apartment for 2 weeks? No way." The landlady laughed. "I will never leave my favorite girl alone or with someone else. With me will go a dog traveler. We will visit Warsaw. And in different cities, we'll travel with her." They talked a little more on the street and then decided to meet at Slava's place to drink coffee and discuss her trip. A couple hours later, after being free, Molly called her friend over to her apartment. Everyone at the table and sliced into a small cake. The hostess began her tale of the travel itinerary. "Molly," affectionately began the woman, "we leave the day after tomorrow. Don't look at me so surprised. We'll rest there for a day, and then a tour of different cities awaits us. First, of course, walks and excursions in Krakow, and then Wrocław, Lot, Warsaw, and Lublin. It is so beautiful there, and most importantly, all the cities are not very far from each other, are located about 200 or 250 kilometers. I guess," my friend suggested. "Such a big itinerary was expensive, probably. So they gave it to you, and you are happy." "Yes, I made my own route." Betty exclaimed. "I came to the travel agency with a ready-made itinerary. Only I asked for a cheaper flight and hotels in the cities for certain days to book. And the tour was not so expensive, but it took a long time to save up, and I had nothing to lose. As a result, they bought a good and rigid carrier to the bag, in which ventilation is provided by the mesh in the front and back. At the same time, the carry-on is a closed system, feels securely open inside. Thanks to the rigid other bottom, the bag is easy to carry and place on different surfaces. For flights, Betty also bought and disposable diapers to put inside. Socks. She also bought several packs of teething bones to keep the doggy occupied for the 2.5-hour flight. Returning to the apartment with purchases, the woman immediately left them in the hallway in public, so as not to forget it all at home. From the bedroom closet, the traveler pulled out a large suitcase on wheels, with which she had more than once gone on vacation to seaside resorts with her husband. 30 kilograms were quickly filled in the past with the things of 2 people. And this time it is to be filled only with things of one kind of fame and a couple of small items. In order to take on tour only the most necessary things, and not to miss with the weather, the woman sat down at her laptop and looked at the long-term forecast for the necessary dates. Armed with the information of meteorologists, she started packing, running around the apartment, gathering the most necessary and important things. The hostess completely forgot about not feeding Pekingese, who looked at her extremely suspiciously from his favorite chair in the living room. "Steve, why are you looking at me like that? I'm taking you and me on a trip. Are you thirsty? Oh, your bowl is gone. I didn't feed you this morning. I'll be right back." Now here I was dragging you around the stores, trying on smells in the store, teasing you, and I forgot to feed you. Finished talking to the dog and fed it. The woman continued her packing. Late in the afternoon, she went to Molly's with spare keys and a request that her friend water the flowers until the traveler returned. "Betty, I'm not just going to do this." Crossing her arms over her chest, the neighbor said, "Well, let me pay you." Betty was confused. "I don't know how much." "No, I don't need to pay you. Bring me something from Poland. Something interesting, not a keychain, a magnet, or a mug, but something original and preferably useful." Oh, the traveler laughed easily. "That's what I had planned. And I was beginning to think that you took offense at me. So you want to teach me a lesson? I'd be happy to. If you enjoy the trip and find some distant relatives," Molly said, taking the keys. "Have a safe trip, girlfriend." "Thank you," thanked Betty, and headed back to the apartment to continue packing. And here it was, the long-awaited day of departure. Betty several times rechecked all the documents, things, transferring veterinary documents to the wall in the apartment, turned off all the lights, having previously emptied the refrigerator of perishables. I shut off the water and went to the airport completely happy. She was almost late for check-in because of the terrible traffic jams, but still managed to make it. Having hardly survived the first airplane flight after a long break, after landing, the pensioner was happy to find herself where she had always dreamed of. The cab driver, who turned out to know English, took the woman to a hotel where she had a short break. After that, she took her doggie and went for a walk to the nearest exchange office to change dollars for the country's national currency. Polish lots are cashless almost everywhere. That's certainly a good thing, reasoned Betty to herself. But local money is also good to have just in case. After that, they went to the city center and found themselves in medieval Krakow, the cultural capital of Poland. This is where the heart beats. Its old town, which is listed as a UNESCO Cultural Heritage Site. There they also took a guided tour of Vienna Castle and St. Mary's Church. The next day, the travelers headed out of town to go to the salt mines of greatness. Their salt, grease, and church awaited them. And after lunch, they visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, the world-famous concentration camp Auschwitz. The history of this terrible place holds many terrible secrets of history and deaths. And the exhibits of torture rooms, the railroad of death, ovens, and crematorium exhibited in the buildings led the woman to a real horror. Leaving behind a scorched desert in her heart, Betty called her neighbor and friend every day via video link, telling about her journey and excursions and impressions. Today, though, the conversation was rather short. The woman had to get ready for the road again. "I have to go to Wrocław tomorrow," said the traveler. "I won't be there for long, though. It is another so-called classical city with an old quarter and a market square in the center. So one day, one overnight stay, and then on to Lodz. Come on, my dear Molly, I'll be packing. I miss you already." The next day, they were already in Wrocław, visiting several famous sites. After that, they went back to the hotel, where they didn't even unpack their suitcase properly. And in the morning, they went to Lodz. Walking around the city, rich in ancient history and sites, Betty was puzzled by doubts whether she had done the right thing to go to Poland, and why. Was this essentially where she was going? She caught herself thinking that she was involuntarily looking for some ancestral markings, similar jewelry or the coat of arms of her ancient family, about which her father, and before him her grandfather and grandmother, had told her more than once and more than twice. But all was, of course, to no avail. Walking around Lodz, which is located only 40 minutes away from Warsaw, Betty did not find the so-called old place. That is, a beautiful large square surrounded by historic buildings and a gingerbread house. All around is one modernism, shabby walls, and urbanism. Isn't it? There are a couple of interesting places that the woman was told about by another tourist. They crossed paths with her on a bench in a converted old factory, turned into a vacation spot for many tourists. "Do you know Roman Polanski?" asked the new acquaintance. "Well, here in Lodz, not in Krakow or Warsaw, is the main cinematographic university of the country, where this famous director graduated." "What am I supposed to do now? Take a tour of the institute?" "Did you poke Betty?" "No," laughed the woman. "I suggest you visit the Museum of Cinematography, the only institution of its kind in Poland, telling the history of Polish cinema. Lodz is the capital of Polish cinema." Thanking the fascination of the interlocutor, Betty moved with her along the proposed route. But we were not particularly impressed with the museum, and the whole city gave an oppressive feeling. Everything here was concentrated on the work of local plants, factories, and other industries. "That's probably why there are so few tourists here," the woman thought. "Although I like this country, I like my trip. I will just rest, but not in Lodz." The woman decided, and having given up on the reservation, packed her bags and left for Warsaw ahead of schedule. "I will stay there until the end of the tour," the traveler reasoned on the way to the hotel. "I just need to contact the travel agency so that they can organize everything and cancel trips to the next cities." The travel agency met the woman's needs. They postponed the arrival and departure dates of the Warsaw hotel and canceled further travels in the country. But at the same time, however, they asked for additional payment, but the amount was not critical. And Betty agreed to everything. And now she is in Warsaw and has a little more than a week to walk around the capital of Poland. Here the woman immediately felt that she was in the capital. Wide avenues, long streets, tall glass buildings. Traditionally in the center is the old town. It's only 60 years old, and it does not have a large number of sights. But even those that there were made the pensioner smile and enjoy the trip. More than once, the maître urged the pedigree to visit the most unusual garden in Warsaw, located on the roof of the library of the University of Warsaw. And the woman went there on the very first day. In this unusual garden of 2,000 square meters, plants are planted in a 30-centimeter layer of soil, distributed over the entire surface of the roof. Here our tourist took a long walk, photographed everything and everyone, and visited the observation deck, from which there was a beautiful view of most of the city. On an evening walk, the woman was already a little tired from so many impressions and sat down on one of the benches. Suddenly, she saw on it some patterns, text, and a button. And not thinking long, she pressed it and heard a beautiful melody, having clarified the information on the internet, as she could not make out the English text on the bench. She learned that it was one of 15 Chopin benches. They were installed for the 200th anniversary of the birth of the famous composer Frédéric Chopin. Each one plays a different piece of music by the composer. Can you believe it, Molly? The traveler shared her impressions in the evening. Music is pouring out of the bench. I've only found 2 benches so far. The first one I accidentally found by sitting on it near the Radziwiłł Palace, and the second one near the Church of the Sisters of the Visitation. Do you know where the others are? A friend asked. Maybe they scattered them chaotically around the city? How are you going to find them? I found information on the internet, Betty replied, that the location of the benches was not chosen by chance. A fact from the life or work of the great maestro is connected with each of the places, and the addresses of all the benches are there. I wrote them down for myself. Tomorrow I'll look for them all and find out why this or that one stands in this particular place. It's all written on them, by the way. I wish I could see them, Molly said dreamily, though it would be better to hear them. But I won't go there, of course. I'm not as crazy as you. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Oops, wondered the woman. They have special photo codes on them. You can download them to your cell phone. Then I'll have the audio guide story and a musical fragment of Frédéric Chopin's work. I'll come back and show it to you. It's a great idea, isn't it? And you and your relatives. What did you ask your friend? Don't fool me with your sights. You came here to find some of them. Who am I gonna find? Betty sighed. I have no idea who or where to look. I can't stand in the main square with a sign. She chuckled sadly. That's why I stopped traveling to the cities and stayed in Warsaw, just to enjoy my vacation. You know, darling, every night I take out my pendant and look at it and realize that I can't get any answers or clues from it. And wandering around town looking for someone who knows something. Strange, unreasonable, and stupid. But at least I'll have a good vacation and bring you and me some goodies. After talking to her friend, after a few minutes she said goodbye and went to the bath. She wanted to relax before a long day of walking in search of the cherished Chopin shops, to say goodbye in the morning, and to have a hearty breakfast. Our traveler decided to go to the market square in the city center and buy some souvenirs for her friends, and then continue her search for Chopin benches. Not forgetting to take Steve with her, she went to the historic part of the capital. There she saw an incredible sight, a real performance by roving street performers, just like in the Middle Ages, Betty thought with delight. The audience gathered around the performers, and the entertainer announced a number called Celestial, and two young girls came to the middle of the improvised stage. One of them starts to climb up the pole to the place where the rope is stretched out, gracefully bows, and stepping on the rope, begins her movement along it. The second girl guards the desperate hunt, moving in her rhythm with the trampoline. Some of the spectators applaud, and some of them shout that the dangerous number should be stopped. But the girl calmly passes her route and jumps on the trampoline, which is waiting for her at the bottom. After that, a cheerful motive plays, and the tumbling and merry motley clowns run out into the square and begin to show a variety of tricks, without stopping fooling around. Betty was having fun from the bottom of her heart, and her eyes were burning, and she clapped her hands relentlessly. And when a screen for the puppet show appeared on the stage and the actors played out the polished folk tale, the golden girl Betty felt like a little enthusiastic girl herself. Being carried away by the puppet show and the tightrope walker, the woman almost lost track of time and remembered to go about her business. But her dog had gone somewhere. When Betty discovered her missing dog, she was terribly frightened, not knowing Polish. The woman nevertheless tried to ask onlookers and passers by if they had seen a small dog, a fluffy red Pekingese. In desperation and tears, she flailed all over the square and nearby alleys, cursing herself with the last words for her indiscretion. In her hands dangled a leash, from which the doggie had somehow scrambled, while she herself was so engrossed in the performance of the traveling circus. At last, and the powerless, desperate traveler sat down on a bench and wept. I'll never find her ever again. Why? Except I brought her with me here on a trip to a strange country. What am I going to do? How will I live without my Steve? Shrill thoughts and unspoken questions were born in my head to glory. Touching the shoulder of a distinguished woman, the stranger spoke, seemingly in Polish. And Betty understood nothing. But then it seemed to her, or did she really hear native speech? Though some words sounded strange, but the local ones were similar. Sprawl was not only in Polish. Sorry, he continued. I don't know what language to address you in. Do you speak English? Yes, I speak English. Wiping away tears, pleased, answered Betty. And I understand a little English. Have you seen my dog in Pekingese? A little fluffy, red-haired one. I went to see the show and she ran away. I don't know how that happened. She's never done anything like that before. No, I'm sorry. The stranger almost interrupted her. I haven't seen your dog, but I can offer you not only my help, but the help of all my colleagues in finding your four-legged companion. Betty finally got a good look at her interlocutor. He was, one might say, a real specimen of male beauty. He looked to be about 60 or 65 years old, and he seemed very, very attractive in the pedigree of his face. And the figure immediately recalled Sean Connery's broad shoulders. Excellent figure, piercing, blue eyes, thick, long dark hair tapered back, mismatched down his back like the mane of a noble lion, barely touched with gray on the temples. All this gave a special expressiveness, appearance, and men. In addition, our and the traveler seemed that the eyes of her interlocutor have such mystery and depth, that the look radiates the strongest attractive energy. This immediately aroused her trust in the man, and then it was as if an electric shock struck her. It's one of those artists. And you didn't dare say Betty at first. You're one of the artists who performed in the square just now. Your English is very good. You what? Your performance was so beautiful. Really, I looked so beautiful, I missed my favorite too. Thank you. Thank you for your appreciation of our humble work. The man bowed gracefully to her. I have relatives in the USA, so I know English quite well, and half of my staff are ethnic Americans. Let me introduce myself. Thaddeus is the leader and director of this traveling troupe. He put one hand behind his back, took Betty's palm with the other, and gallantly, bending down, kissed it lightly. Amazed at his manners, the tourist poor declared with embarrassment, "It's a pleasure." She stretched out, smiling. "And I'm Betty." Betty hastened to add she, and for some reason, added the widow. "I live in New York. I came here on an excursion to see Poland. I've been meaning to, you know." And then tears came to her eyes again. "Oh, Thaddeus has come to life. That's interesting. Do you have relatives here?" "Yes and no," Betty answered, not wanting to tell her family history so hastily. "Don't worry about the dog," the man consoled her, seeing that all his thoughts were focused on its disappearance. "Now you and I will look for her, and if we don't find her, we'll put an ad in the newspaper and post it on the bulletin boards. I'll write it in Polish English so everyone can read it." "Thank you so much," smiled Betty. What would I do alone now? But what was he gallantly offering her hand? "Let's go and look for your girl," and they set off in search of her. But after going all around the market square, looking in the most secluded corners, asking every passerby about the dog, they could not find her. Having finished this unsuccessful search, the man suggested that the distraught pedigrees go to his trailer, have tea, and draw up a missing animal notice. Heading for the trailer, they continued to question all the people they met along the way and looked in all corners in search of them. Inessa, Glory was already tongue-tied, but she kept calling and calling for her baby girl. "Steve, where are you?" But all to no avail. As he approached his van, Thaddeus apologized to his guest. "Please humbly forgive me if it turns out to be a mess inside. We have a poodle in the troupe. We leave him in the trailer after he's done his act. That unfit schoolboy, and how the earth still bears him." Saying all this, Thaddeus conjured up the van door, which turned out not to be closed tightly. "Did one of ours close the door badly?" Thaddeus exclaimed. "And something tells me now that we don't count as dogs either." Once inside the van, they both froze in amazement, because they saw the following picture on the small sofa behind the glass plate, peacefully lying next to a black dog with white spots. Here was the fugitive with her own person. Seeing his mistress, she yawned and stretched out from behind, wagging his fluffy tail bagel. "That's how it started, Thaddeus. Isn't that your dog? A Pekingese?" "You said so," my stunned Betty replied. "That parasite drove me to a nervous breakdown. I've spent half a day looking for you. No good," she said angrily to the doggy. "And you are." "Come on," laughed the man. "You should not swear at her. If it is not realized at you, then maybe the leakage began, and our muzhiczku, she liked it." "Yes," the woman answered confusedly. "That's probably what happened." But why didn't she respond? Well, apparently she was not up to it. Thaddeus smiled slyly. "Oh, never mind her." Betty was embarrassed. "The main thing is that she was found. Thank you, Thaddeus, for your help and for finding my girl." "I don't even know how to thank you." "Let's switch to you," said the artist. "If you don't mind, of course. And you should not thank me, but the chance that brought us together, as a result of which we found your country. You're keeping a close eye on it now. It is quite possible that in some time it will make you happy with offspring." "Oh," Betty exclaimed again, looking at her dog. "I hadn't even thought of that. Well, I'm going to deliver the baby. I've been a midwife for over 30 years for a reason. I don't think it's any different for dogs than it is for women." She laughed. "And as far as you're concerned, I don't mind. Go ahead, really. I should be at the hotel a long time ago to call my friend." "If you let me, Betty, I'll walk you," said Thaddeus. Taking Betty in her arms and heading for the exit, the woman fastened the leash and was about to put the doggy down on the floor when a young girl came through the door. She had beautiful and blonde hair, developing like ears in the field. Wheat in the wind, gray eyes dazed, very fluffy, long and dark lashes cast a shadow on her blush-covered cheeks. Thin, slightly upturned nose, high cheekbones and pointed chin added to her appearance. Lowering her gaze, Betty saw her huge belly and out of old habit immediately determined that she was about to give birth. "Meet Betty, this is my daughter," Jadwiga said with pride. Tedious. Guest artists kindly said hello to the young, special, and a little chat with her. Jadwiga said that she would give birth only in a month and a half, and then added that the girl herself would be 17 years old the other day. Betty hesitated to herself about the correctness of the term, but she didn't express her doubts aloud. Why should they? After all, this woman in labor is not her patient. They'll figure it out for themselves. She must have a mother, Tedivas's wife. This thought made Betty sad, and she hurried to say goodbye to her hospitable hosts, accompanied by the head of the wandering troupe, who insisted on seeing her off. She headed for her hotel. All the way, Tadeusz talked about Poland, about his hometown, retold the family history and legends concerning this or that landmark. Before entering the hotel, they parted. In the room, Betty immediately called her friend Molly, and the latter was already sitting all nervous and very worried about her traveler friend, who did not get in touch at the agreed time. The woman apologized to her interlocutor and told about Stepa's disappearance, acquaintance with Tadeusz, and the performance of real wandering artists. Having shared all these impressions, the woman said goodbye to her friend and went to bed. "We'll feed. I would be for my favorite dog." Toward morning, a shrill ringing sounded in Betty's room. She recklessly jumped out of bed, not realizing Pine where she was or what had happened. She dreamed that she was back at her old clinic delivering a face patient. Recovering a little, she saw that it was barely light outside. Turns out the receptionist's desk called. "Betty." The young receptionist answered the phone in a worried tone and began to speak quickly in Polish. "Speak English, please," Betty tried to tell her, but the receptionist had apparently forgotten all the English words. The woman realized that something out of the ordinary had happened and wanted to go downstairs and put on a robe. But then Betty's excited voice came through the phone. "I apologize for waking you so early. We really need your help. Jadwiga seems to be in labor. Didn't you say you've been a midwife for years?" Yes, please. I'll be right down." The woman replied in a businesslike manner. "Give me 2 minutes." As always in such a situation, Betty was collected and calm. Here she gathered it into a high bundle. She got dressed, stroked a peaceful goodbye in the armchair, and left the room in the lobby. Tadeusz was measuring the space with his steps worriedly, clutching his hands into his long hair. Betty pulled him aside and asked him what was wrong. Jadwiga spoke in a whisper to the man. "She feels very ill. Her stomach is pulling, her back hurts. She complains of severe pains. I can't call a doctor because we don't have insurance. We are very afraid that something is wrong with the baby. Please help us, we'll pay for it. I don't want any money." Pulling him toward the exit, the woman replied, "Let's run to save your daughter and child." A cab was already waiting for them at the hotel entrance. They reached the place where the trailer was parked in 5 minutes. Betty ran into the trailer first. Hearing the exhausting screams, the girls from the far room rushed there. The girl was lying on a disassembled bed, and the sheets showed wet patches of broken water. Examining the laboring woman and probing the baby's location, the woman said the raft was positioned correctly, but it was quite large, and the mommy is too young and the passage for the baby is complicated. But there is no pathology, and she will be able to manage quite well on her own, requiring hot water, a towel, and clean sheets. Betty went about her usual work, and then a very strange thing happened. At some point, while examining the girl, she saw on her delicate neck, knocked out from under her nightgown, a pendant exactly like her own in the same simple gold setting with a natural transparent sapphire. For the first instant, Betty froze in place, stunned with surprise. There's the truth of the saying, you never know where you'll find it and where you'll lose it. Could it be that these wandering artists were her distant relatives, or that this thing had gotten to them in some other way? But there was no time to ask, and there was no time for that now. Come on, try a little harder, girl." The midwife was encouraging the woman in labor. That's good. Now just rest a bit. Breathe steady. You'll have to work hard again soon." During this rapid labor, quite a few people had gathered in the van. All artists worried about Jadwiga and trying to help in any way they can. There were women and men, and among them a dwarf with a rather ugly appearance, and even the alarm clock came running. And the task at hand, and from time to time whimpering softly and pitifully in their own way, reliving the incomprehensible and terrible incident. In the room of the laboring woman, of course, no one was allowed in, and even Thaddeus was banished by the stern midwife. "I'll call you when I need you, be nearby, and there's nothing for a man to do here." Betty accepted only the help of a bewildered young woman who carried her hot water, sheets, and other necessities. While in the next room, Thaddeus wrinkled his nose in his own pain at every scream Jadwiga made in the noise from behind the tightly closed doors. He could not find a place for himself. He really wanted to go out for some air and a smoke, but he was afraid to leave his post. What if his daughter needed his urgent help? That's it. Now push. Push, and with all his might he shouted Betty, so that even he could hear her cry, followed by a loud and thin one. Thaddeus exclaimed, and unable to hold back any longer he broke into the next room. A smiling Betty turned to him, holding a newborn infant in her arms. "Congratulations, Grandpa. You've just had a baby, a beautiful grandson," she joyfully informed Thaddeus. After the infant was born, almost every one of the entertainers hugged and kissed Betty and thanked her for her help. Then he also hugged her tightly and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Thank you, gently," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. The woman felt as if she had been doused with hot water, and a pleasant pinching sensation swept over her whole being. "There are no words to express my gratitude. You don't know how worried I was," Thaddeus exclaimed. "I can very well imagine," laughed the midwife. "In my practice, I've seen enough excited men. They offered to feed, water, and birth Betty, and the very distressed one soon brought her a cup of divinely delicious coffee and coffee. Betty drank with pleasure, but refused to drink any more. "You all need to rest and recuperate," she told her new acquaintances. "And so do I, of course you do." Thaddeus slapped himself on the forehead. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I'm not myself right now. I'll order you a cab right away." As she finished her second cup of coffee, the cab had already arrived to ask Jadwiga or Thaddeus Akula, not Betty decided later. No time. She'd have time for that now. Back at the hotel, she barely threw off her outer clothes, fell into bed, and instantly fell asleep. Even 2 cups of strong coffee didn't hurt. So tired both physically and emotionally, the woman woke up. She was nearing lunchtime, frightfully hungry and terribly satisfied. "Stop what you're doing." The educated Pekingese jumped on the bed with her mistress and started licking her hands and face. Betty finally got up, showered, changed her clothes, picked up the restless, and went outside for a walk to give the doggie a proper run and somewhere to eat in some lovely little alleyway. She found a lovely little cafe. The sign in Polish and English said that it offered authentic home-cooked food. Betty decided to have lunch here. She took a round table on the summer terrace and began to study the menu, but her mind wandered far away from the obscure gastronomic names. Again and again she returned to the morning event, remembering an unexpected meeting in the family jewels. Dozens of questions were born in her mind. Where is this girl's mother? Who is her husband? In fact, is she married? How is her last name the same as her father's? Or does she carry her husband's last name? Are they really distant relatives? Or maybe it's just a simple coincidence and a pendant. The young artist simply bought at some flea market in a souvenir shop. What's the multitude on these ancient streets? The smiling waiter interrupted this continuous series of questions and asked what she would be ordering. Betty explained in English that she didn't understand the names of the local dishes and asked him to advise her on a tasty and inexpensive snack. "You were right to ask me for advice," the boy said, revitalized. "I recommend this dish. What is it? It's a dish of cabbage and Warsaw sausage. Try it. It's very tasty. And for dessert, I offer you our specialty, the mazurka. You won't find such a mazurka with a picture anywhere else. And of course, coffee. Oh no, I've had enough coffee for one day. Why don't you have some chamomile tea? Of course, we'll find whatever she wants." The waiter assured her fervently and quickly left so that the order could be prepared immediately. After a hearty lunch and very tasty indeed, Betty leisurely took the loop, searching the streets at random where the curve would lead out not the backward thoughts, but the family jewels, stalking her and preventing her from concentrating on sightseeing. Ended up wandering aimlessly. At some point, she decided to take a tour of the Vistula River and thus fill the rest of the day. She returned to the hotel tired but very satisfied. She had hoped to see Thaddeus there, or at least to find a note from him at the front desk, but there was none of that. A little disappointed, our tourist went up to her room, traditionally called her friend, and decided to visit the van of traveling artists the next morning. But returning to the spot where the trailer had been parked yesterday to visit the young laboring woman and baby, as well as Thaddeus, thoughts of which haunted her as much as her own family matters, she found to her utter disappointment not even a trace of the van in which she had found her missing dog the day before yesterday. And early yesterday morning, she delivered a sudden labor. "But I wasn't dreaming all this," puzzled muttered to herself in her usual manner, scrutinizing the immediate surroundings. How could they have left without warning me? Over and over again, she asked herself the same questions, but there was no answer to them, just as the day before. Betty drank with pleasure, but refused to drink any more. "You all need to rest and recuperate," she told her new acquaintances. "And so do I, of course you do." Thaddeus slapped himself on the forehead. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I'm not myself right now. I'll order you a cab right away." As she finished her second cup of coffee, the cab had already arrived to ask Jadwiga or Thaddeus Akula, not Betty decided later. No time. She'd have time for that now. Back at the hotel, she barely threw off her outer clothes, fell into bed, and instantly fell asleep. Even 2 cups of strong coffee didn't hurt. So tired both physically and emotionally, the woman woke up. She was nearing lunchtime. Frightfully hungry and terribly satisfied. "Stop what you're doing." The educated Pekingese jumped on the bed with her mistress and started licking her hands and face. Betty finally got up, showered, changed her clothes, picked up the restless, and went outside for a walk to give the doggie a proper run and somewhere to eat in some lovely little alleyway. She found a lovely little cafe. The sign in Polish and English said that it offered authentic home-cooked food. Betty decided to have lunch here. She took a round table on the summer terrace and began to study the menu, but her mind wandered far away from the obscure gastronomic names. Again and again, she returned to the morning event, remembering an unexpected meeting in the family jewels. Dozens of questions were born in her mind. Where is this girl's mother? Who is her husband? In fact, is she married? How is her last name the same as her father's? Or does she carry her husband's last name? Are they really distant relatives? Or maybe it's just a simple coincidence and a pendant. The young artist simply bought at some flea market in a souvenir shop. What's the multitude on these ancient streets? The smiling waiter interrupted this continuous series of questions and asked what she would be ordering. Betty explained in English that she didn't understand the names of the local dishes and asked him to advise her on a tasty and inexpensive snack. "You were right to ask me for advice," the boy said, revitalized. "I recommend this dish. What is it? It's a dish of cabbage and Warsaw sausage. Try it. It's very tasty. And for dessert, I offer you our specialty, the mazurka. You won't find such a mazurka with a picture anywhere else. And of course, coffee. Oh no, I've had enough coffee for one day. Why don't you have some chamomile tea? Of course, we'll find whatever she wants." The waiter assured her fervently and quickly left so that the order could be prepared immediately. After a hearty lunch and very tasty indeed, Betty leisurely took the loop, searching the streets at random where the curve would lead out not the backward thoughts, but the family jewels, stalking her and preventing her from concentrating on sightseeing. Ended up wandering aimlessly. At some point, she decided to take a tour of the Vistula River and thus fill the rest of the day. She returned to the hotel tired but very satisfied. She had hoped to see Thaddeus there, or at least to find a note from him at the front desk, but there was none of that. A little disappointed, our tourist went up to her room, traditionally called her friend, and decided to visit the van of traveling artists the next morning. But returning to the spot where the trailer had been parked yesterday to visit the young laboring woman and baby, as well as Thaddeus, thoughts of which haunted her as much as her own family matters, she found to her utter disappointment not even a trace of the van in which she had found her missing dog the day before yesterday. And early yesterday morning she delivered a sudden labor. But I wasn't dreaming, all this puzzled muttered to herself in her usual manner, scrutinizing the immediate surroundings. How could they have left without warning me? Over and over again she asked herself the same questions, but there was no answer to them. Just as the day before, Betty spent the rest of her vacation days wandering around Warsaw without any enthusiasm, without much interest. Looking at the sights of Chopin's narrow benches, she eventually found everything, but this search did not bring her the expected joy. Quite the opposite. She wished to discover in these peculiar streets and squares without report. She looked for Thaddeus in every person she met, and in every passing large car, that familiar van. It had to happen, to suddenly find and then lose her supposed relatives overnight. It was all very, very strange. On the eve of her flight, she had gone to the market square in the old town to buy a few trinkets as gifts for her friends. Molly wanted something interesting, and she wanted something for herself and for the interior. Original, polished, handmade Betty long wandered from cellar to cellar, but could not make up her mind or find something that at least somehow attracted the eye. And then the woman heard the guide, who was telling in English to a crowd of tourists the story of the Warsaw Mermaid. Her image is depicted in bronze all over the capital. There are many images of mermaids, but this monument in the market square of the old town is one of the most popular. It is a symbol of the city, which has a very interesting history, continued the guide and Betty. I came closer to hear the whole story. According to one of the legends floating on the river, a mermaid stopped in Warsaw to rest. Once out of the water, she fell in love with the beautiful city and later decided to protect the capital of Poland and became one of Warsaw's most recognizable symbols. The Warsaw Mermaid has been admired by local and visiting artists for centuries. You will not believe, dear guests of the capital, but in the past the city was called the Garden of Mermaids. The image of the mythical creature has changed over the centuries, but as a symbol of the current capital of Poland. It has existed since 1390. The group of tourists, along with the guide, went further away, and Betty finally realized what souvenir she wanted to bring back from her trip. Warsaw Mermaid. Unfolded Poles 100. A woman went in search of the symbol and protector of Warsaw. Let her protect me, thought the traveler, and it would look beautiful on the table in the living room, so that every guest could see it and admire it. As a gift to Molly, the woman decided to bring from Poland the cutest woolen slippers with embroidery. They are so warm and breathable. And in the apartments from September to April, it is quite fresh. Betty spent a long time looking for ones that her friend would definitely like in shopping rows and souvenir shops. Prices for slippers started at 40 zlotys, and the tourist still had enough national currency left to buy a gift in cash. There were still a few hours before the flight, and the punctuality of Betty, who was very afraid of being late, already arrived at the airport together with Street, and she did not want to get lost. She kept close to a group of English tourists flying home on the same flight, and even found a companion. For talking, they drank too much coffee, and the woman, having asked her new acquaintance to look after her dog sitting in the carriage, herself headed for the restroom. Somehow, having sorted out the Putin and their signs, she finally found the room she needed. True, she went into some little visited corners of the airport, and the restroom was twice. Maybe it was a service restroom, but she had no choice. The need desperately demanded, so to speak. She pulled back the easy door and found herself inside a clean, sparkling tile. The 3-stall restroom near the sinks was completely empty, and Betty was even glad of this circumstance. After all, in the other ladies' rooms she had to visit at the train stations, the line had changed in 2 rows, and there was already little time left before the departure of the flight. As soon as she grasped the handle of one of the booths, she suddenly felt someone coming at her from behind. Strong hands, seemingly wearing gloves, forcefully crushed her neck. Her eyes went black and the ground fell away from her feet. In desperation, the woman grabbed the perpetrator's hands in her beer and dug her long, sharp fingernails into his palms. She fought back as hard as she could, tried to scream and make some noise, but it was useless, and after a few seconds, the world around him swam away. The air in her lungs seemed to run out, and the hapless tourist was engulfed in total darkness. Her last thought was, strangely enough, the memory of tedious and bitter resentment at his behavior. Betty was saved only by the fact that one of the guards also decided to use the restroom at these moments, and already on the approach to the door heard the noise of struggle, muffled shrieks and wheezes, and unhappy victims. The assailant, seeing such a turn, fled the scene, knocking down the savior of glory. The latter called for reinforcements over the radio. A general alarm was sounded at the airport. A couple of minutes later, the emergency team arrived and the victim was hospitalized. The victim woke up in the hospital later that night. Betty could hardly understand where she was and what had happened to her. The first thing she did was grip and complain, asking the paramedics to find her poor dog. She was lucky the Pekingese had already been located and brought to the clinic. A woman Betty had spoken to at the airport helped. It was she who informed the police officers that the dog belonged to the victim of the attack. The next day, our traveler contacted the agency, reported what had happened, and asked to change her tickets to an open date. Unfortunately, it was impossible to change this ticket. The plane left. The ticket was burned. Not even the money can be refunded, the tour operator said. You will, of course, be paid the full amount of the insurance, plus medical expenses and possibly moral damages. In the meantime, I can only express my regret about what happened and help you buy a ticket for another convenient date. No, the girl answered Betty. Thank you. I don't know when I can leave the country yet. I'll contact you later. Goodbye. After hanging up the phone, Betty hesitated for a moment, but then dialed her friend's number. Molly, hello. She began the conversation timidly. You won't believe this. I've decided to stay in Poland for a while. Hello, what do you mean I won't believe it? Of course I believe it. The friend on the other end of the line laughed. Your life there is much more interesting than it was here. New cities, new sights, new acquaintances, and adventures at every turn. Ha! The traveler interrupted. Can you look after my flowers a little longer? Where would I go? I'm watching, of course. Is there anything you want to tell me? Maybe something happened again. You sound strange. No, nothing's wrong, the woman answered hastily. I just caught a little cold, but I'm all right now. I'll be back a little later than I planned. That's all. Her friend didn't believe her, but she didn't ask any more questions. Why bother her unnecessarily? I'll tell you when it's done. Maybe, Betty thought, when she finished the conversation, a doctor came into the room and told her about the tests, the results of the CT scan and the patient's further actions. If everything was normal, she would be discharged in a couple of days. Meanwhile, you cannot worry to leave the hospital and make sudden movements. Because how the body will behave, subjected to a short-term Hippocrates, is still unknown. After the doctor left, the next visitor appeared on the threshold of her room. A representative man in uniform from the Central Investigation Department of the police. He was clean-shaven and tall, and could not have been more than 30 years old. Zbigniew Kowalski introduced himself in decent English. Chief Commissioner of the Central Bureau of Police Investigation. Tell me, do you feel more comfortable speaking in Polish or English? If it is not difficult for you, answered the victim in Polish. I can only say hello. How do you know English so well? My mom is American, the guy smiled. That's why they sent me to you, so I wouldn't have to look for an interpreter. While the investigator asked her formal questions and filled out the necessary documents, Betty was able to scrutinize him. He was of medium height and sturdy build. A massive, slightly upturned nose stood out on his round face. The color of his eyes the woman could not discern behind the jubilant glasses, which Kowalski wore without taking them off. She noted that he shaved daily. It gave away a faint irritation on his smooth cheeks, and his arms were so long that it seemed to the tourist that he could pull a book from the shelf above the bed without even getting up from it. You have a Polish name. And judging by the documents, Zbigniew said thoughtfully, "Your father's name is also Polish, so I thought you might speak a little of our language. Well, shall we speak English? A criminal case was opened on the fact of the attempt on your life, having watched the surveillance cameras at the airport, as well as compiled a sketch of the attacker from the guard's words. We found the perpetrator and apprehended him. Since you're not allowed to leave the hospital yet, I've brought along a photograph of the man. Take a good look at it. You might know him." The woman in the photo portrait was looking at a young man in his early 20s, a slightly thin, elongated face with handsome and delicate features. His curly blonde hair was cut short, and in his light eyes of a strange mixed hue danced the evil lights of a batsman. Betty caught herself. She had already seen this man in Tadeusz's corpse, speaking in the square and then in the trailer when Jadwiga gave birth. "My God," she awed, covering her mouth with her hand. Betty knew. "No, I haven't, and I've seen it, but I don't know it personally. I met the director and manager of this troupe of traveling performers the other day." "They're not the same ones," the investigator interrupted her. "They were performing the other day in the market square of the old town. They have a big trailer labeled Comedians Theater." "Yes," they answered the woman. "That's where I met them, in the square. To be exact, 100 meters the director of the troupe and barely his daughter. And this young man was in Tadeusz's troupe. I don't know him exactly, but he's not very sociable. That's for sure. With the others we hugged and talked, but he always kept to himself, especially afterwards. After which the policeman quickly asked, 'Why did you keep quiet?' But first, Betty, afraid to tell the policeman that I delivered a baby in a foreign country without a license. Jadwiga had a difficult situation there. She delivered the baby right in the van, and I helped her a little bit quickly," she added. "The labor was easy. Don't get me wrong. I am a certified doctor and obstetrician, retired. But experience, as they say, can't be forgotten." After the delivery, all the artists thanked me and rejoiced. But he looked at me very suspiciously and did not say a word. I always notice such things, who behaves like that. And I remember looks well, too. Where is this troupe now?" "I have no idea," sadly sighed the woman. "I wanted to visit them all the day after the birth, but the trailer and the artists themselves and the trail gone. They didn't even say goodbye to me. Can you imagine?" She complained indignantly to the investigator. "And this boy, why is he with me? So what did I do to him? Maybe they're all in cahoots. God, why would they do that?" Her lips trembled, and she frowned and covered her face with her hand. "Don't worry, please," Zbigniew said sympathetically. "We'll be sure to find all this out soon. Thank you very much for all this information." He thanked her. Betty Wenceslas. "You now get well and do not worry about anything. There is no need to be frightened and get yourself worked up before the time. There will be no problem. If they are not guilty of attacking you, an investigation will solve everything. But first, we have to find them. Goodbye. See you later." He smiled warmly at her and walked out the door. The investigation has put out a wanted notice for the traveling troupe. The detainee was silent as a fish and was in no hurry to testify, demanding a public defender. The law enforcers delayed, promising to find a free lawyer from one day to the next. But in the meantime, they put him in a cell with the most egregious scumbags. But even there, he didn't talk. Betty was released from the hospital a couple days later. She was almost all right, but she was not allowed to go home yet. Her testimony could be needed at any time. She was promised to pay all her living expenses. The woman withdrew more money from her card, found a cheap hostel, and stayed there. For the first time in 4 days, she went out to walk Steve at the airport and then at the hospital. The poor dog was sitting in his socks. Good thing she had a supply of diapers with her for walks. The woman dialed familiar American numbers. "Hello, Molly." She greeted her friend on the phone. Betty, who finally decided to tell her friend how are things at home. "Hello, Betty," suspiciously answered the interlocutor. "I'm fine at home. How are you doing? You're not coming back anytime soon." "Yeah, I guess not anytime soon. And I want to tell you why. Remember I told you about the artists missing a dog and me delivering a young girl's baby? Oh, wait a second. What's next? Why do we have to cut to the chase? Yeah, I got tangled up in the leash. I had to untangle it. Anyway, after that, they left and didn't even say goodbye to me. Can you believe that? And at the airport? You called me and said you changed your mind about flying and didn't even go to the airport. Molly interrupted the narrator. That was after the attack. Betty exhaled. What attack? Almost shouted into the phone of her friend at the airport. I was attacked in the restroom, tried to strangle me. I almost passed out. Probably would have been the end of me, but the security guards saved me. I called you from the hospital. I didn't know how to tell you. Oh my God. You're doing it in your voice, Molly. What does this have to do with your street performers? Well, an investigator came to my case and showed me a suspect, and he's one of the troupe. But I've only seen him perform twice. And when I delivered the baby, I didn't even talk to him, so why would he kill me? I don't get it. Betty began to resent her friend, who was dumbfounded by the news. I told you that your trip in your old age is a reckless act. Your stupidity has driven you almost to your grave. Your virtue almost killed you. Why did you go to those tramps? Why did you deliver a baby in a foreign country? I just wanted to help good people. Wiping away her tears, the woman whispered back. Yeah, and they probably wanted you for the windows. To keep your mouth shut about them. How can you be so gullible? Come home right now before that damn corpse makes a corpse out of you. I can't. The police have left me in the country until the end of the investigation. All they have to do is find the artists, and the perpetrator is already behind bars. Don't worry, Tanya, please. They know who they're looking for. I think they'll find him quickly. But my dear, Molly has spoken out strongly. It's up to you, of course, but I'm very worried about you. Take care of yourself and stay in touch with me. I will. And please tell me everything right away, just the way it is. Okay, Molly, bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye. My traveler sighed and said goodbye to her friend Molly. Having finished the conversation, Betty walked with and a little more and returned to the hostel, where with a pure heart and fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. After a while, the woman got a call from the investigator with good news. First of all, they had found a troupe of itinerant artists in the village of Loo, not far from Warsaw. In the second, they had nothing to do with the attack. Betty was invited to go with the police to the place where the artistic troupe was parked. A couple of hours later, Zbigniew Kowalski picked her up in his official vehicle, and together they traveled to the northern part of Hungary and the lowlands to the river valley. Singer, driving through small streets, cozy villages, and with obvious pleasure looking at cute houses and their inhabitants, the woman thought that it is very good to live here, forgetting about the hustle and bustle of the city, and enjoy everyday picturesque rural landscapes. The woman's thoughts were interrupted by a stop near a small house. Detached, standing on the corner of the outermost street. Beyond it, the endless fields could be seen, and a familiar van was parked there. They were already waiting for them in the house. Tadeusz and Jadwiga were there, as well as a couple of other familiar pedigree artists. Having already learned from the investigators what they were suspected of and what their comrade named Gabo had done, they were in complete shock. When they saw Betty, all the artists began to apologize to her. Betty dear, said Tadeusz embarrassedly, looking at her pitifully, like a beaten dog. There are no words to express my regret. After all, it was I who got you into such an ugly story. Believe me, neither I nor anyone else in my troupe had anything to do with this attack. Thank our lords and gentlemen for keeping you alive. I hope you're in good health now. Tell me, what can I do for you? Thank you very much, Tadeusz, but I don't need anything. Betty answered him dryly and stepped aside. She was very offended by him, and not even for the fact that in his troupe there was a man who tried to kill her, but for his unjustified departure without any farewell, putting everyone at the table. Zbigniew Kowalski asked the leader of the traveling artists to tell everything he knew about the culprit, as well as the events of the day Betty had helped him with Jadwiga's labor. Well, Tadeusz began, I'll have to start from afar. You'll have to be patient. First of all, Jadwiga is not my daughter, or rather, not my own daughter. My late wife and I found her near our house. Right here, in a beautiful little basket. There was the pendant she wears around her neck now. A note with the girl's name on it, and a will made out in her name. My wife and I immediately decided to keep the girl. Since we had no children ourselves, God didn't give us any. Thaddeus sighed heavily. But we didn't officially adopt her, but registered a guardianship so that in the future she would have no problems with the will. When I turned 16, Jadwiga herself picked up her adoptive father's story. My parents told me the whole story. My grandmothers will said that I would inherit all her property only when I reached the age of majority. But I did not look for my parents and my blood relatives. After all, Thaddeus and Ariadne have become my real mom and dad. She looked at my father with gratitude and love, and I love them very much. I didn't even go anywhere with this will. Why should I do all this if they left me? And the girl's voice treacherously trembled. After Ariadne's death, the man continued, looking over his daughter's shoulder. I decided to put together a traveling circus, traveling through the towns and giving performances, just like they used to. Back in the old days, my years as a student at the circus school gave me the opportunity to put together a real troupe and put on good acts. It wasn't hard to find like-minded people. We started rehearsing on this very field. Then we bought some trailers and started traveling around Poland and all over Europe. We were gaining popularity. New people were added to the troupe. Gabriel joined us in Gdansk. He liked our performance, and he was a qualified acrobat and did some pretty good routines. He was so skillful at gaining our trust, interrupted Father Jadwiga, that even I melted and told him that I was the heiress of a rich family with a good devotee, and that if I wanted to, in 2 years my father and I would be very rich. God, what a fool I was, she added, her eyes downcast. After that, he started courting me, and I'm an idiot. I fell head over heels in love with him. He seduced me embarrassingly and quietly, Jadwiga said, and I got pregnant almost immediately. But I couldn't tell Daddy who the father of my child was. Gabriel made me threaten not to tell anyone, and I obeyed. I knew my dad would kill him if he found out. I was afraid, so I kept quiet. And after I gave birth, I persuaded my dad to get out of there. I took advantage of the time when Gabriel was away on business, and I told my father that I had seen the father of my child in the neighborhood, telling him that I had been abused. The last time we were in Warsaw, which was about 9 months ago. I told him that I was very afraid of this man. My father was angry, of course, that I had kept it from him for so long and wanted to go to the police. But I managed to persuade him to go home immediately. I hoped that Gabriel would realize it and not come back here. Please forgive me, Betty, for not even saying goodbye. It's all my fault. She turned to the woman. I know it looked very ugly, but please understand, I was very afraid of that horrible man. Don't worry, child. I understand you perfectly now. Betty grinned bitterly. As for the circumcision, I don't know what he did next. He hasn't called since we left, and he hasn't shown up. And I was beginning to think I'd managed to get rid of him at last. Jadwiga continued. But yesterday the police came and told us everything. Betty walked over to the girl and put her arm around her shoulders, trying to calm her down, burst into tears from overwhelming emotions. Calm down, baby. You need to think more about your baby than anything else right now. This kind of nervousness could make you lose your milk. Milk, I think I saw a chamomile in your field. Come on, I'm telling you, tea from them will help. You'll see. And both women left the room where the interrogation had unfolded and left them both, and sent one of his men to escort the women to keep an eye on them. Kowalski hastily recorded the testimony of Thaddeus and Jadwiga, and did not react in any way to the display of emotion on their part, interrogating them and the victim. Only asked Jadwiga to sign the protocol. Leaving, Betty noticed the looks Bignew gave the young mother. Kowalski finished his work and offered her to return to the city with him and his partner. But the woman refused, as she had already received an invitation from Thaddeus to stay in his glorious home. After such sincere explanations, Jadwiga felt sympathy for her new acquaintances again and decided to stay with them for a while, especially since she liked it so much here. After seeing the policeman off, the master of the house returned to the living room to offer a kind of glory, a guest room. But the traveler, and with her Jadwiga, was clearly not up to it. They deployed a global search throughout the house, peering into every nook and cranny. "And what are you looking for, lovely ladies?" the man asked in surprise. Steve spoke of Betty, almost crying. "She's lost again. I came with her, went in the house, let her go. She was with me the whole time. And then I don't even remember when she disappeared. And now that nasty dog's not responding again." Angrily, the woman finished her tirade. "That's what Thaddeus said, smirking. 'I think I know where, maybe your mom, we're next to our poodle.' Laughed, answered the man, and went to the window. 'Look out there,' he pointed off in the distance. Betty ran up to him and saw in the field not far from the house. Her precious little girl and her fidgety poodle were running and frolicking merrily. A left-handed poodle. The dog's guts had apparently opened up a real mutual sympathy. And so had their owners. After all, every living thing in this world wants both happiness and love. Betty spent an unforgettable evening in this hospitable house, helping Jadwiga and the cook Mela prepare an authentic polished dinner. "How delicious!" the woman exclaimed after tasting the fruits of her labors. Thaddeus and all the others present laughed merrily. "I see you are already talking like a real Polish woman," he said. Glad for the glory. After dinner, he offered the woman to move into his house as an expensive guest while the investigation was underway, so she wouldn't have to spend money on a hostel. Betty gladly agreed, and the morning they went to Warsaw with the rest of the hotel, but they had to stay there for a while. Kowalski called and said that Betty needed to report to the office early tomorrow morning for a confrontation. Gabriel finally spoke, mentioned Zbigniew in the conversation. They decided to spend the night in a hostel, since Betty had already paid for the accommodation. They spent the day walking around Warsaw, and then had dinner at a cozy restaurant run by an old friend of Thaddeus's. At the end of the pleasant evening, when dessert was already brought to them, Thaddeus ordered 2 glasses of wine, and looking Betty straight in the eyes, took her hand. He said quietly and affectionately, emphasizing the first syllable. Betty was embarrassed, for no one had ever called her that before, not even her late husband. "I want to tell you, Thaddeus went on the minute I saw you like that. Confusedly so defenseless and incredibly beautiful there. But the singing benches made my heart ache. And then in the trailer when you delivered my daughter and were so kind, so compassionate, and so determined. It was in that minute that I realized you were my destiny. But then, when Jana persuaded me to leave urgently, I was so scared for her that I couldn't bring myself to come to you even for a minute to say goodbye. Forgive me, my dear, but you see, fate has brought us together again, albeit in such a terrible way. Oh, how nervous I was when I heard you'd been attacked. I'm ready to kill that scoundrel with my own hands." The man exclaimed and clenched his fists hard. "I don't know if you have the same feelings for me as I do for you. But if I don't ask you this question now, I feel like I'll never know the answer. Betty, I fell in love with you at first sight." The man Thaddeus finished decisively. Only the woman could utter, and looked at him with a happy and loving look. That night they spent together in a modest room from the table. But how happy were they? Betty felt like a young girl again, knowing what love was for the first time. In the morning, appearing outside the Central Police Investigation Office, the couple waited for the Chief Commissioner, who promised to meet them and escort them to the office for identification and confrontation. Good afternoon. Zbigniew Kowalski greeted Thaddeus and Betty Wu. "It's good to see you both." "Hello." The man and the woman said hello to Vitalivich in different languages and smiled. Finding herself in a gray, faceless room, where only opaque glass separated her from the cut. Her ancestry became uncomfortable, but feeling the support of her lover, she tried to hold on. The investigator motioned for her to sit down and asked in a formal tone for the record if she knew the man, recording her statement. He went to interrogate the suspect and told Slava that from here she would hear everything that would happen in the next room. Through the speaker, Thaddeus was allowed to be with her during this time. Having finished explaining his rights to the young criminal, Zbigniew turned on the tape and asked the prisoner to begin his story. "I can't boast of rich relatives." Smirking, the boy began his story. "And in general, life has not been favorable to me since I was a child. But I always wanted to have something that is just given to all lazy rich people to earn a living. I learned the art of acrobat and got a job with this traveling troupe, And when did you plan to seduce the underage Jadwiga? Asked the investigator. This fool with a sarcastic smile, said the suspect. For some reason, she thought I had a keen interest in her, and one evening after another performance, she told me that her father was not her kin, but was following her. Wow, what a pedigree. And there's a lot of money to be made, but only after she's of age. That's when I decided to trick her into having sex and a wedding. But I didn't plan on her getting pregnant. The bastard added cynically that when she got knocked up, she decided, what's the difference? To kill her alone after receiving the inheritance, or the two of them. When she went into premature labor, I thought that's good. A dead baby and one less problem. But he'd already dug up that old midwife and saved her bastard. So you decided to kill Mrs. Betty, Zbigniew said, for interfering with your plans. No, she didn't. The perp leaned back in his chair and continued. I was in the trailer when the labor started. The room there, small. You can see and hear everything. I noticed how surprised the old woman was when I saw the column. The girl told me herself that they were trinkets of her ancient family, so I crept closer. Thought maybe you guys were up to something. Did you see or hear something interesting for you? Zbigniew Kapras asked. The midwife. She started muttering under her nose that she had the same pendant and that she thought it was the only one. So I knew she was a midwife. It must have something to do with the inheritance, her bank, the births, and their richness. What surname secrets? I wasn't going to share anything or anyone. I wanted to marry the girl when she was 17. And the midwife decided to remove the grandmother just in case. What did she want? The villain grinned. But the guard brought her into the latrine for some reason. And your stupid cameras on every corner. They've ruined my day, so I'm just sitting here packing. I'll start like a cuckoo, and I guess I'll have to sit here for a long time. But I don't want to go to the tower, Gabriel said. That's why I'm telling you the truth. I'm pleading guilty, or whatever it is. I was told that they wouldn't give me too much for attempted murder if I cooperated with the investigation. That's correct, Zbigniew confirmed. Sign your statement. You'll see it right here. The investigator ordered him to the escort. The man himself got up from the table and went to Tadius with Betty, opening the door to the interrogation room. He saw the following mute scene. The woman was dumbfounded, staring out the interrogation window where the breeze had just sat, unfazed, and her companion was looking at Betty herself in exactly the same way. How do you comment on the defendant's testimony? The investigating officer asked her. Also reluctantly, the woman admitted. I was taking a delivery from Jadwiga and happened to see her pendant. I have one just like it. I came here to find out something about my family, maybe find someone. And now I think I have, but about inheritance. I didn't know anything about the big money or that the girl wasn't Tadius's real daughter. I swear. Wow, Tadius said gravely. So you didn't think it necessary to inform me about your secret. It just didn't work out. I'm sorry, Betty replied guiltily. At first, the labor was exhausting. Then I thought I'd come back tomorrow and ask, but you weren't there anymore. And then I somehow didn't find the time or the right words. What exactly do you know about your lineage? Zbigniew inserted a remark into their dialogue. Not much, only what my father told me. Our family Voronets is a distant branch of Zborowski. The pendant was the property of Anton Voronet's wife, and then passed from generation to generation to the eldest daughters in the family. In the middle of the 19th century, one of our ancestors moved to the USA, and there the highest approved opinion of the State Council was recognized in princely dignity. After Revolution, my great-grandfather could not leave in time. Hid was killed, and his son, by a miracle, has survived and has changed a surname. That's all I know. I will help you and Jadwiga, said the young investigator to find information about his family, especially since she is about to inherit. Is it possible for you not to leave Poland yet? Yes. The astonished Betty was willing to do anything to find out more about her ancestry. On the way back to Lithuania, she and Tadius hardly spoke. They only called Jadwiga and asked her to bring the whole troop home to tell them the latest news about Gabriel. Tadius and Betty were already waiting for them in the living room, and at the communal table, they told everything they had learned about the crime, about the young man's intentions toward his young victim, and about Jadwig's possible relationship to Betty. To say that those present were shocked is to say nothing. But it was not even the latest news that struck them, but the deep disappointment in their comrade and lover, who had lived and worked with them side by side for more than 3 years, when everyone separated and Jana asked Betty to help her with the baby, for she herself knew almost nothing about caring for a newborn. Before going to bed, sitting on the open terrace, Thaddeus and Betty finally decided to have a one-on-one talk, to discuss everything they'd heard today. "I don't mind at all, as long as you're still living like this." "We're still searching for documents," the man began. "And I was just thinking that you, having found out everything about me, would take offense and ask me to leave." Betty replied quietly. "Of course I was upset, but we're not little children to sulk about anything and demand that each other be completely honest with someone we don't know very well." Still a little offended, Thaddeus replied, "Thank you for understanding. But I'm really only happy to open up to you, and Jadwiga just had no reason, you know. So many events, so many things have come upon me." Betty's tired, she closed her eyes. "Of course, how stupid am I?" Thaddeus was angry with himself. "I think only of myself, and you probably haven't quite recovered from that terrible accident." "I'm sorry, Betty. I'm not quite myself either." So our lovers reconciled and spent the next few days in harmony and peace. Betty remembered to call her friend every day and share the latest news. "Betty," Molly marveled, "I'm with you when I talk to you. I feel like I'm watching a TV show, not talking about your life. I'm listening honestly. That's how you got the trains." Molly, smiling, replied the traveler. "Do you know how I feel now? There are no words to describe it." "I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I'm in love. Can you imagine at my age? Love is for all ages." I guess the neighbor was referring to Thaddeus. "Yes, I guessed it before you did." "Aha. But I'll be glad if everything works out. You want to stay there now?" "Oh, I don't know yet, but I really like it here." But he hasn't really talked to me about the future yet. He probably doubts whether he should tie his life to such an old purse. Betty laughed, pretending to laugh, though she was a little nervous. "But I think you'll find a solution soon," Molly reassured her. "Just don't forget to call me once in a while." "Of course I won't," Betty replied. "I can't do without our conversations. I'm used to it." "Oh, we're talking too much. It's getting late. Let's say goodbye. I'll call you tomorrow. Good night." The next day, a car stopped under the windows of Tadeusz's house, and Zbigniew Kowalski, in a civilian suit, got out of it. He apologized for arriving unannounced and brought a cake to the table to make amends. While the women were busy in the kitchen, they set a modest table in the living room. The men talked about Gabriel and his future fate, inviting everyone to the Betty table. She brought in the sliced cake tea utensils and joined the common meal herself. "But I came to you not only with news on the criminal case," began the investigator. "Everything is clear there. You Betty Vaclav may not even attend the trial. Your testimony is recorded. The video camera footage and his confession will do the trick." "Thank you." "Did you find out anything about my family?" the woman asked shyly. "That's what I came here to find out, having made inquiries at the city and church archives. I compiled everything we know about Betty Wenceslas and Jadwiga's relatives. It turns out that you are distant male relatives to each other. You share a fourth-generation ancestor. Your great-grandfather Betty Wenceslas had a brother who managed to escape the Red Terror." "My father never told me that," the woman said thoughtfully. "He probably didn't know it himself." "Well, I can't add anything here either. The only thing we know is that your great-grandfather's brother was also born and lived in the USA, and then moved to Poland to his distant relatives." "Why was I dropped off at Tadeusz's house?" Almost crying, Jadwiga asked, "Was I illegitimate or unwanted? In the year you were born, your parents' house was attacked, and they were killed in a robbery." The investigator read from the documents. "And the old grandmother, at which, apparently, you at this time and were, could not alone bring up the baby and preferred to give to other people, leaving all the inheritance of her only granddaughter. She herself passed away a couple months after this tragedy." When the conversation was over, Jadwiga left to feed the baby, and Zbigniew Kowalski left. After seeing him off and saying goodbye, Betty and Thaddeus also decided to take a little walk in the open, taking their dogs with them. They warned Jana of their excursion and set off for a walk across the field towards a small leafy area. It was getting dusk, and the loving couple continued on their way, talking about everything in the world, but not about the departure of the kind of fame that frightened her. This conversation because she so much wanted to stay here move her ears. But to talk about it with her beloved, she did not dare. And Thaddeus himself leisurely, walking next to Betty, thought how lucky he was to have been 3 times lucky in life. A wedding with his unforgettable Adriana and a picture with little Janet. And this, when they had no hope of having children of their own. And finally, it was meeting Betty. He had long ago made important decisions for himself, and even bought a ring to propose to his beloved. But he was so afraid of hearing a negative answer that he didn't dare to ask her like a boy. But after today's conversation with the investigator, when he said that the victim could go home, Thaddeus realized that it was time to act. He started this walk in order to talk to her seriously and ask her the single most important question. But still he remained silent. If I don't make up my mind now, he thought, I'll finally lose her forever. Am I ready for that? No. Betty. Stopping on the forest path, he turned to the woman. I want to talk to you. No, not like that. I want to tell you something. Well, all right. Betty answered uncertainly, glancing at the dogs running nearby. I'm listening. One fine afternoon, Thaddeus began, speaking once again in Warsaw in the market square of the old town. I saw a woman running around looking for her doggie, and then she sank down on a singing bench in tears. My heart fluttered like a young man's, and I couldn't help but approach her. What was my surprise when our dogs found each other before you and I did? Betty nodded and laughed softly. I was. Just then, Thaddeus dropped to one knee. Betty clamped her hand over her mouth, unable to utter a word. Thaddeus took some small thing out of his pocket and continued talking for a short time. That you and I know each other? I realized that I want to be with you always, not just now. I want to live in the same house with you. I want you to be a grandmother to my grandson, to have tea with you every night on the terrace and discuss our future. And now I ask you, do you want the same thing, my dear? Do you agree to be my wife and live in the same house with me and make me the happiest man in the world? Yes, of course I do. The woman exclaimed, and tears of joy spurted from her eyes. And I was so afraid to ask about our future. I was afraid you'd see our relationship as short-term. Yes, I do. I agree to everything you've offered. Placing a simple wedding ring on his bride's finger, Thaddeus picked her up and twirled her around happily before gently placing her on the ground and kissing her. In a few minutes, they moved back to the house, not forgetting to click the dogs on the terrace. Jadwiga was waiting for them with a cradle in which little Miroslav was sleeping peacefully, having seen the radiant faces of their loved ones. The girl realized that her father had finally made up his mind and received a positive answer. She was only glad. This fact she liked Betty very much. In her, Jadwiga saw a kindred spirit from the very beginning. And now it turned out that they were really relatives. After discussing further plans for life and the woman's imminent move to Poland, the happy family went to bed. A couple of days later, thanks to the investigator Kowalski, Betty was accepted at the embassy and helped in the execution of documents for living in their country and in the rapid registration of marriage with a Polish citizen. Her visa was extended so that she could return to Poland after settling all her affairs in the USA. There she decided to sell her apartment, sort out her documents, and pack the necessary things. She was going to return to her homeland without, so as not to traumatize the doggie with the flight. After all, this non-fashionista was about to become a mom of several puppies. So what? So she's got a beau. Now you have to apply for Polish citizenship. The mistress joked affectionately, stroking her glasses on the already slightly rounded music. Quickly, you're all over me, and Betty started to laugh like a madwoman. It was a blessing that no one else was present at this scene. After arriving in the USA, Betty first went to her friend's house to tell her the latest news and to present her with gifts from Poland. Molly supported her friend in everything, not forgetting to grumble a little. However, as usual, her neighbor volunteered to help her with packing and packing the necessary things. Betty found a reliable real estate agency and concluded a contract with it. The staff arrived, inspected the house and the apartment, assessed the location of the building, the proximity of the metro, and the presence of the Trubetskik Estate Park in Komovniki. The landlady only had to wait for buyers and pack her things, what she often did together with her friend Betty. Shouting from the hallway, "Molly, do you need all these boots?" "Molly, don't yell. I'm not far away." The landlady came calling. "Oh no, of course. These boots 100 years old. Where you found them in general do not even remember where and when they put them on the closet in a box," showed neighbor. "It's gonna take you and me a long time to sort through all this junk. Good thing you're not leaving tomorrow. Right?" "Yes," Betty laughed. "It'll take a long time, but I'll take only the most valuable things with me." "Don't you miss your step?" Molly asked as she continued to sort out her friend's shoes. "I miss it, of course." The woman smiled. "And not only for her. Katie does calls every day. We talk for hours. Jadwiga and the baby talk to me too. I miss them so much, Molly. I'm so attached to them that I decided to move to a foreign country in my old age." "What's a foreign country to you now?" "Look how fortunate you are to have found your happiness and family. I'm sorry I fought when I heard about the trip. I was worried about you, but it turned out so well. But apart from the attack, of course, Molly." Betty exclaimed, remembering something I'd forgotten. "I found all the Chopin in my bench, took pictures on my phone and scanned the codes. To show you, so we can listen to the musical excerpts together." "Oh, I had already forgotten about these singing benches," laughed the woman. "Your life has become much more interesting than this Polish miracle. But now that you've done it, let's watch and listen. Look, holding out the phone." Friends began the story of the traveler. "The first 2 shops I found immediately. I told you. Of course, I didn't go looking for her the next day, dating, childbirth, and so on. And then I had nothing to do. So I went traveling around Warsaw." "You look like you're on a treasure hunt," Molly remarked. Betty laughed, not knowing the language and not knowing where to go. "I felt like a real job seeker. So listen. There are 15 benches in total. 14 of them in the Old Town, and the last one in the park in front of the Fryderyk Chopin Monument. Ah, how I wish I could wander around Warsaw," sighed my friend after listening to the immortal enchanting melody. "I'm inviting you to my wedding." Betty told her cheerfully, "Just promise me you'll come." I was confused by my neighbor. "Oh, this is so sudden. I probably can't handle this trip. I'm not as brave as you." "Nonsense." Betty laughed. "I'll arrange everything, and you'll get help from the same agency I applied to. And we'll pick you up at the airport with 100 girls." Betty was happy to sell the apartment where she had been so happy with her first husband. Standing in the hallway just before leaving and watching the remaining boxes being loaded into the van, the woman took one last look at her home and said goodbye to it forever. As she crossed the threshold, she turned a new page in her life. Before the wedding, Glory had a nightmare, or rather a day. She had to have time to do a manicure, pedicure, visit the boutique to pick up the ready bouquets. She could barely find the right botanicals for the groom and book a hairdresser to do her hair for Jadwiga and Molly, who was flying in tonight. Both of them were bridesmaids. It wasn't until after midnight that all the women in the house, having finished their last preparations, dispersed to their sleeping rooms. To get a little nap before the big day, brides of all ages go crazy the night before the wedding. I'm as calm as a boa constrictor. I barely had time to think about the glory and fell asleep. Tired from a hard, long day, Tadia's and Betty's wedding itself was quite modest. It was an off-site reception in the backyard of their beautifully decorated home. Present, of course, were all the members of the theater company. Jadwiga and her baby sweetly assisted with the household chores, and Zbigniew Kowalski to Mendelssohn's wedding march. Out of the house came a charming bride in a beautifully colored dress, which advantageously emphasized her good figure. As she approached the registration desk, she felt her legs trembling, but it lasted only a moment. When her beloved groom took her hand, all excitement left Betty in a flash. The registry clerk began the solemn speech after the consent of the bride and groom. They were invited to sign in the civil registry and then exchange rings. The guests exploded with wild applause and cheered with shouts after the newlyweds kissed. The celebration was noisy and fun, and the friendly troupe put on an unforgettable extravaganza for the bride and groom. With the money from the sale of the American apartment, the newlyweds decided to renovate the house and expand the terrace. Miroslav was growing up and was already learning to crawl. Steve became a mom of 3, fat little puppies who all looked like poodle bears. And Tadeusz and Betty couldn't get enough of their happiness. When the house renovation was finished, Betty had a new idea. What if we made a puppet theater out of our old van? She suggested it to her husband for an evening sitting on the patio, just like in the Middle Ages. Only with a motor, not in a wagon. Tadeusz laughed. Yes, exactly like that. We will show performances on holidays and weekends for all comers. At the next fair, I will make puppets myself. There will be such wonderful crocheted dolls. The scenery promised to draw. And the scripts and performers are on you. Why not? Great idea. Agreed husband, and the very next day began work on the reorganization of the van, in the repair, and then in the creation of a puppet theater. The family was helped a lot by Zbigniew Kowalski. After the investigation and the trial, they never stopped their communication. And every Thursday they organized big gatherings at their home. Betty often noticed Zbigniew's loving glances towards Jadwiga. Seeing the way he treated the girl and her baby, the woman thought that they would be a wonderful couple. But to push the young mom to a new relationship after such a creepy story with a stabbing, she did not dare. When Jadwiga turned 18, the whole family went with the will to the notary. There they learned that the girl's inheritance is simply huge. A mansion in Krakow, in the historic part of the city, and several accounts in Swiss banks. The notary introduced the family to the property manager, who all these years managed it in the interests of Jadwiga Voronets. The rich heiress herself decided that she wanted to stay at home in her native village for the time being, and take only a small amount from the money fund to formalize properly. Puppet theater. The girl decided to celebrate her birthday on a large scale. After all, adulthood comes once in a lifetime, and the weather in early fall was very suitable for an outdoor celebration. Among the invitees was Zbigniew Kowalski, who wandered around Warsaw in search of a gift for the birthday girl. At home, the young man decided to ask his mother for advice on what he would give the girl on her coming-of-age day. Sonny answered his mother give her something she is interested in. Books, if she likes to read, brushes and paints, if she draws tickets to an exhibition, if she is fond of art. I do not know what she is attracted to. Mom's not all that. I want to give her a special gift. What's that? The woman looked at her son so carefully. Are you finally in love? Yes, I am, but she doesn't know yet. I don't know if I should tell her. She's got enough on her mind as it is. I'll remind you of that story about your criminal. She's a good girl, she's not broken, she's not shut down. She's living, raising her son, and she's happy. If you think that she will be uncomfortable with your confession, or it is inappropriate, then you drop it. It is better to immediately deal with such a situation, in order to avoid awkwardness in future communication. You're probably right, Zbigniew agreed with his mother. But I'm so afraid to hear you say no. You're a grown-up boy, you're worried. But there's no point in getting lost. And about the gift, you should take my advice. Buy her what she needs, not just trinkets to waste money, which she has, as I realized, now plenty. Let her see you paying attention to her and her life. Okay, sighed the man. Thank you so much for the advice. I'm gonna go to work, and on my break, I'm gonna go get a gift. I think I've thought of something to buy Jadwiga. The day of the girls' coming-of-age party, beautifully decorated tables were set up in the backyard overlooking the field and forest. Nearby was a photo area reflecting the circus and theater world that was close to almost every one of the host's guests. Betty and Tadeusz were adding the finishing touches to the decorations, and Jadwiga, leaving Miroslav in the care of the nanny, was arranging the cutlery on the tables. At that time, Zbigniew arrived at the house, who wanted to present the gift and talk to the birthday girl in private before all the guests arrived. Good afternoon, Kowalski greeted everyone. I decided to come early to help with the preparation. I hope you don't mind. "Hi," Betty answered cheerfully. "You're always welcome. Come in and help us move the chairs out of the house." "Hello, Zbigniew." Tadeusz shook the man's hand. "Let's go inside and get the chairs. We'll also call Jadwiga. I gave her my present." The house smelled of pies, cookies, meat, lemons, and something else overwhelmingly delicious. Having finished helping, Tadeusz asked Jadwiga if she would like to talk to him one-on-one. The girl smiled and invited her suitor into the house. Once in the living room, Zbigniew was silent for a long time, gathering his thoughts, and the girl waited patiently for him to speak. Dear Jadwiga finally pronounced Kowalski. "Your birthday has passed, but since we celebrate only today, accept this gift from me." "What is it?" asked the girl. "Oh, so many packages of valuable paper. My patience is about to run out later. It's Mew-like, isn't it?" asked Zbigniew. "I didn't know what you needed for a long time, and I didn't want to give my face everywhere. It took me several days of searching, and almost in despair, I came across a master puppeteer in the market square of the old town. And I realized exactly what I wanted to give you. I ordered a portrait doll of you dressed as a circus performer. You recently told me you'd never perform again, but it was your true calling. So I thought I'd capture you in your favorite image. Thank you very much." The girl thanked him. "I really like it. I have to show my dad and my family this beauty. Did you want to talk to me about something else?" Putting your doll copy on the fireplace in the living room, Jadwiga asked, seeing that the boy was still writhing around. "Yes," Zbigniew answered timidly. "Really, I don't know where to start. Do you want to make me an offer?" The girl laughed. "No," I was afraid of her question and her reaction. "Boy, your decent behavior in this whole situation." Zbigniew interrupted his monologue. Jadwiga walked over and kissed the guy on the cheek. "You're so sweet. I only recently realized how much I love you." Kowalski continued to speak enthusiastically. "And some time ago, I realized that I need to explain myself to you to stop my torment. If you reject me outright, that and I will not come across you again. But if you decide to give our relationship a chance to grow, I'll be very happy. The main thing is not to think that I have a vested interest, that my recognition is connected with receiving this inheritance and other things." Zbigniew. The girl interrupted him again. "You're all so boring in the police." She came even closer to the guy and put her hands on his shoulders. "Jadwiga, I know perfectly well that you are not like that scoundrel. I can see that right away." "Well, well, well," Betty interrupted their embrace, entering the living room with a baby in her arms. "Look who's finally matured and opened up to each other. Tadeusz will be so happy. I told him about you guys a long time ago." A couple minutes later, the guests started arriving. The backyard was abuzz with revelry. Tadeusz's traveling troupe. They put on a little birthday show for the birthday girl. They pleased little Miroslav with their costumes and cheerful numbers. Zbigniew and Jadwiga, practically the whole evening, did not remove their hands, which did not go unnoticed at all. After a few months of romantic courtship, Kowalski decided to make Jadwiga a proposal, and the organization of the surprise to the guy helped Betty. When everything was ready, she offered to sit with Miroslav while the young go on a real romantic date. Jadwiga and Zbigniew went to a small and cozy restaurant in Warsaw to be alone, taste delicious food, and drink champagne. After that, they went to the market square in the old town, where Tadeusz's traveling troupe used to perform. And now they were already in the middle of the crowd. Surrounded by a new performance, a puppet show from Tadeusz's renovated van, the happy couple watched familiar and unfamiliar acts. They were laughing and enjoying what was happening on stage like children. And suddenly one of the puppets of the entertainer in a strict suit announced to the whole square, "Attention, attention, dear spectators. Now a very special number is presented to your attention. Tadeusz Kowalski will play the title role of a romantic hero." All the actors, puppets, and spectators turned towards the couple in love. Jadwiga raised her beautiful eyebrows in amazement, not understanding anything. She looked at Zbigniew without taking her eyes off him, and he got down on one knee and opened a pretty velvet box in the shape of a rose in front of her. "I don't usually participate in theatrical performances, but today is a special day, I have been thinking for a long time what to say to you, my beloved. I've been practicing so I don't lose my voice at the right moment. It's hard to find the right words when you're standing in front of the most beautiful girl in the world. But I'll try. Excitedly, Zbigniew spoke. Jadwiga, my dear, you are radiant. A star that appeared in my life, suddenly, as all stars do. You and little Miroslav changed my whole life, changed me myself. I am grateful for your joy, for the warm, bright light you give me every day with your mere presence. I want it to be like this always. So please become my wife and accept this family ring. My mother wore it, recently widowed, unfortunately. And before her, my grandmother. I'll be happy if you wear it on your dainty fingers from now on. You. Around the couple, there were enthusiastic voices shouting. Applause was heard in different languages of the world. But the girl as if frozen in place and could not utter a word. So she had to ask her cherished question again. Then one of the artists couldn't stand it and beat a drum. Jadwiga immediately came out of her daze and said the most important thing, yes, in her life. The square exploded with applause and cheers. And the engaged and the lovers couldn't stop looking at each other. And suddenly dozens of rainbow star bouquets flashed and blossomed in the sky above the square. This artist arranged a festive fireworks in honor of the young couple. The wedding was played 3 months after this unforgettable evening. The bride as a beautiful princess in an airy wedding dress with an uncle on her head and luxurious wheat windows walked down the aisle under the arm of her father. Zbigniew, dressed in a stylish, light gray suit with holy smells and an unusual bright monogram, looked at the wedding with loving eyes. The whole village celebrated for a few days, and then the lovers went on a wedding trip, leaving in the care of relatives a little son, whom Zbigniew later adopted. While the young couple was on vacation, Kowalski's mother, the respected Mrs. Soja, moved into Jadwiga's old room by common consent, so as not to live alone and help her son and daughter-in-law with the baby. However, when the newlyweds returned from their romantic trip, it became clear that soon the care of the happy grandmother will be added. Soon after the wedding of the young Betty and Tadeusz, went on a short trip to Poland to see different sights and show the townspeople their puppet shows. Every Saturday, the troupe presented a new performance, which was a consistent success. Several years passed. Tadeusz himself wrote the script for the play, which was especially beloved by the audience. It was a touching story about the life of love and betrayal, about difficult fates and difficult decisions. Jadwiga Kowalska, which the young Zbigniew gave to his young bride, was rightfully considered the most beautiful doll, which even won the first prize at the city exhibition. Now they had 3 little ones growing up, and each had his own dog. One of the puppies is a spectacled poodle. What mischievous pranks arranged all this motley gang. In the evenings, all the members of the large and friendly family relaxed after a hard day's work on the large glass terrace. Jadwiga is a master of new dolls. She found her calling in this craft. Zbigniew touched sticks for them, for which they were then led. Betty knitted, and everyone did what they wanted to do. And Tadeusz wrote new scripts for their performances, and thought about how fortunate everything had turned out in their lives. In one of such evenings, he decided to write a book about the fame who came to search for his kin, about an adopted daughter pregnant by a scoundrel, about the complicated fate of the ancient family, about Zbigniew, who became a real support for his Jadwiga, about all the tragic and comic events that happened to them over the years, and about himself, a traveling artist who lost and found his true love again.